Well, good morning, Year 5 and Year 4 parents. This is a workshop which will talk to you about Reading Boys and outline all the things that are involved in their examinations. Obviously, there's been one sizable change in terms of Reading Boys, and that is actually bringing the exam earlier on. I think the head teacher, from reading what he'd said on his website, on the school's website, was that he didn't want children necessarily doing lots of study over the summer holidays. And I think I would certainly agree with that. I think it is nice that children can enjoy their final summer holidays before they go into year 6. And yeah, I would say that that's not a bad thing. What it does for us as a company, though, is it does mean we need to bring everything slightly further forward. So things like our mock exams and revision camps, then we obviously need to bring those slightly earlier. But the main aim of the session today is to very much give you an idea about what the exam is like, introduce you to or show you some of the question styles as well that your child has to answer, and hopefully also provide some suggestions on things that children should be doing at home, as well as obviously attending our weekly lessons, really to give them the best possible chance of success. So what I'm going to do now is just share my screen with you. Hopefully you'll be able to see this open, and we'll then go through these slides. A lot of the information that we have gained about Future Stories has come from various documents that they've released, because they don't just operate for Reading Boys. They, for example, do cover off some of the grammar schools in Devon. They also operate in Essex as well, and do have various grammar schools sort of dotted around the country, which they provide examinations for. That's not to say, though, that they are all the same. It tends to be often that the exams that they set for the grammar schools tend to be slightly different. Unlike GL assessment, where, for example, if you were doing the Slough Consortium, the child just does one paper that counts for all those different schools. A lot of the information that we've gathered, though, does come from what Future Stories do publish. And if you go on to the Reading School's website, you will be able to download these two documents. I think part of the feedback that we give in terms of sending the recording through to you, we will also make sure you have access to these two documents if you haven't already seen them. I thought it would be a good idea, though, to start by just talking a little bit about Reading Boys and really what they're looking for, because I think it is quite a unique school in the sense that it is very much about trying to make sure that children aren't just getting into the school based on kind of rote learning. And they want children to be, I think, best way of describing it is quite worldly, quite curious, quite inquisitive. And I think this slide sort of highlights that. So just a little bit of background then. 138 places each year are given, plus 12 places each year for boarding as well. It talks a bit on its website about Reading School is the perfect place for boys who are curious, bright, and love learning. And I think that's really important. I believe that a lot of our students are that way. They're curious, they ask questions, they enjoy studying. I think children who maybe find things difficult at school in terms of basic reading skills, basic mathematics, I would say maybe this school isn't quite the right place for them. So boys who love giving everything a go, boys who grasp new ideas quickly without extra study, boys who enjoy coming up with new imaginative ideas, boys who like applying learning from one topic to another, boys who keep going even when something is unfamiliar or difficult, boys who like the tricky questions which have more than one answer. And I think that really encompasses what they're looking for. And I think the new exam system does that. I think it is all about things like critical thinking. It's about getting children to use the information they're given to solve problems. And it's not so factually driven as some of the 11 plus exams have been over the years, where you kind of teach them a technique, they go into the exam and they apply it. I feel this exam system is slightly more broad. I think it's looking at different skills. I think it's also far more reliant as well on their Key Stage 2 curriculum. However, what children, of course, don't get exposure to within their own primary school is the opportunity to answer questions, to understand the format of the exam. And I think all of those things, of course, make a huge, huge difference. And as we see underneath there, and I won't go too much into this, but of course, Reading School has been named as one of the top 25 schools in the land. And again, is a very, very prestigious school. They do also offer 10% of places via a sports aptitude test. So if your child is sporty, I'll give you some dates in a moment, then that may well be an option that you want to go for. I think what's also important to realise is that children with SEN, they are all about ensuring, and this is one of the sort of mottos from Future Stories, is making sure they have an opportunity as well to access this exam system. And I think that's really important to realise. So everyone finds their place at Reading School is the sort of tagline there at the bottom. So just a few more dates just to give you. Don't worry, we'll of course send this these slides out and the link out to you, so you'll have them all. They are all of course on their website, but they are certainly really important that you don't miss these dates. So on the 25th of March, there is an open day. You do need to book a ticket. So you go onto their website, book a ticket. I think you're allowed to have possibly two guests, I think. So two parents can go along, or your child and the parents can go. But it does require booking because they often get quite busy. So they do require you to book that. The online registration will open also on the 25th of March, sort of the same day as the open day, but the closing date is the 17th of May. It is so, so important, and I always say this, but that is a window of opportunity that you mustn't miss. You must make sure that you've gone onto the portal, you've registered your child to take the examinations. Otherwise, unfortunately, there's very little you can do in terms of backtracking. The evidence deadline, and what we mean by evidence is if your child does have SEN, then that is supporting evidence, for example, for a dyslexia diagnosis or autism, which you need to provide to the school so they can make special access arrangements on the dates of the test. I mentioned about the sporting aptitude assessment. That will take place on Sunday, the 12th of July. And then the test date for SEN applicants is the 15th of July. The test date for day and boarding applicants is Thursday, the 16th of July. So this is the big shift that we've seen. It is important to realise, and you will know this from your postcode, and hopefully you maybe even made contact with a school or you've seen the map, that there is a catchment area. So if you are outside of catchment and you're applying, you will still do that exam in September on the 25th, on Friday, the 25th of September. The timeline after the children do the exams is generally fairly cemented. So the results will come in mid-October. That's when you will find out what your child has achieved. I think Reading now very much does a pass or fail, really. It doesn't provide a huge amount of detail, I don't think, anymore in terms of score. But if you do pass, then you will need to fill out the CAF form, the Common Application Form. And that's where you list your schools according to the ones that you want in your local authority. And that will need to be completed by the 31st of October. It is important that you rank those schools in preference order. And it is important that you do meet that deadline of the 31st of October. But of course, you're then very much informed. You know how your child has got on in their exams, and you can list those schools accordingly. If we move into 2027, not to wish your lives away, but if we move into 2027, the offer date from the local authority is the 1st of March. That's when you actually find out if your child has been given a place in the school. So again, based on various variables, of course, passing is the initial part, but then in terms of where you live, in terms of priority areas, that is going to make a difference. Acceptance deadline is 12th of March. Generally, if your child passes, not many people turn it down in terms of the place, but you might, there could be external factors like, moving area, etc. Welcome evening then in June, induction day is in July, and then the start of the term is the 3rd of September. So again, sort of moving forward quite a lot there in terms of the dates. So I think the most important thing initially is to go and attend the open day. I would certainly suggest you go and do that. Listen to the head teacher, go for a visit, look at the facilities, take your child with you. They certainly, I'm sure, will give you a real good indication if it's a school they would like to try and get into. And I'm sure they will be very impressed with the school and certainly its facilities and things as well. So the other thing, and I'm not going to go too much into this because you can see I very much sort of copied this blurb from the website. This was just about emailing the school if your child has any SEN or specific medical needs. Do obviously get in contact with them. It is about providing the documentation in terms of supporting any diagnosis, and they will then arrange potentially for the access arrangements to be in place. And that can include, for example, extra time. Could be anything up to 25% extra time. They may even have a scribe, for example, or someone to read some of the questions to them, depending, as I say, on the sort of severity of their needs. So I'll again make sure that slide is present. There's some very useful email addresses there for you to reach out to the school in terms of the admissions team and also the SENCO as well. Right, I think we'll get into now just talking to you more about the exam itself. So there are 4 different papers that the children will take. They can be sat in any order. So we have what's called the adventure paper. This is any subject listed, and we'll go through the list in a moment, but any Key Stage 2 subject listed with multiple choice answer options. A beacon paper, which again can come from any of the different Key Stage 2 subjects, and short written answers. And I'll explain a bit more about that as we go through. A compass paper, which again is any subject listed, multiple choice again. The format we took last year with our mock exams, which a lot of our parents told us was very, very similar to the actual exam, which is always very pleasing, was that the compass paper included the maths and the English, whereas the adventure paper covered the other subject areas. That's how we kind of designed it, and it seemed like they went down the same similar route. A discover paper is the creative writing. You will find in a lot of literature by Future Stories, they don't call it creative writing, they call it creative response. But we are looking at something incredibly similar in terms of what the expectations are for the children. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go down through each of those papers, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the types of questions that the children may well see, or the style of questions. We do have a chat today, so if you would like to have a go and you would like to answer some of the questions, they are multiple choice for quite a lot of them, then you're more than welcome to put the answers in the chat. That applies both to parents and to children, okay? Don't worry, it will remain anonymous should you not do so well, but I will I'll be able to monitor the chat and see how you're getting on. Please don't see it as a test. I'm not here to test you today. So let's have a look at the adventure paper first of all. Now, I thought it was also worth mentioning, just to give the children a little bit of familiarity, and I think that's why these familiarisation booklets are quite nice. That's what the paper will look like, and when the children do the multiple choice answers, they will have a separate sheet. And on there will their details will already be present. So, for example, their name, their primary school, their date of birth, their username, test date, and of course the room that they're sitting it in. If any of that information is not correct, they must just raise their hand. Now, the likelihood of that happening is very, very remote. So it's nothing for the children to worry about, but it's just worth checking to make sure that all those details on there are the right ones. So they have a separate multiple choice sheet where they transfer their answers across. Now, you may have heard me mention earlier about the number of subject areas that the questions could come from. Now, we have got art and design, computing, design and technology, English, geography, history, languages. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You might think, oh, is that Spanish, German, French? No, we'll talk about that later and I'll show you an example of what that includes. Maths, music, physical education, and science. So a huge breadth of subject areas there that the questions could be chosen from. And we'll have a look, as I say, at more of those individually. I did want to provide as much detail as possible in this session, so I think it's worth just talking a little bit about the multiple choice sheet. So children have to shade in their answer. So as you can see here, and if I actually get a pen myself, if you can see on the screen these ovals that are given here, so I'm just looking at this part here. So if the child thinks it's C, they shade in that oval. Now, what's really important, because they don't have a rubber, they will be using a black biro, like I've shown you here, that if they do make a mistake, they put a cross through it and then they mark another answer. Now, it could be they change their mind more than once. That's also fine. But again, they've just got to be really clear that they show that answer correctly. So again, when you're using a multiple choice sheet, there are quite a few things that you need to be aware of. Firstly, that the question correlates from the question paper to your multiple choice sheet. And we talk a lot to the children about this, that they must make sure, and particularly in our mock exams, that they use these sheets properly and in the right way. So our mock exams very much mirror this style, of course. So unlike GL assessment, so if you do have a child on our combined course, the GL assessment exam, they use a pencil, horizontal lines. If they make a mistake, they rub it out and put the right answer. Unlike Reading Boys, which uses a black biro to indicate their answer in a sort of a shading fashion in the ovals. So I hope that's clear. And that applies both to the adventure and the compass papers. So I'm just going to go back just to reiterate that. So the adventure paper uses multiple choice questions and answers, and so does the compass paper. Okay, so just to be clear about that. So again, what subjects do they test? So the test may include any of the following subjects you learn at school, which shouldn't be anything new or extra to what you have already been taught up until the end of year 5 only. I do find sometimes with the 11 plus exams that they do talk about trying to marry it to the national curriculum. And I believe on the whole, that's probably quite true. But I do think sometimes when you look at some of the maths topics that come up in these exams, they don't always do them in year 5. I know it's dependent on the school. They tend to do them in year 6 or beyond. So I think what you just need to be conscious of is that sometimes some of the topics that we may be doing in the classroom, so I know, for example, they're doing maths at the moment, where they're doing things like ratio, algebra, nth term, your child probably will say, no, I've not done that at school. But we know, because of the feedback we get, that they can be part of the 11 plus. So I think we need to take it with a slight pinch of salt when it talks about only up to the end of year 5. Yes, that might be applicable to some of these subjects that are here. But when we look at maths and even some of the English concepts, I would say it's slightly beyond that. So what we're going to look at now, we're going to look at these subjects individually. So, art and design. And you might be thinking, how can how can an examination test art and design? Well, I'll show you an example of a question in a moment to give you an indication of how it can be tested. But one of the things they suggest is that children have a deeper understanding of famous artwork. So, looking at artwork. So, if you ever have an opportunity to go to, for example, the Tate Modern, do take your child along to have a look at different bits of art, whether it be abstract or surrealism or whatever it might be, but also getting children to experiment a little bit with colours, mixing paints, trying different shades. I've just shown you a colour mixing chart there, and I certainly remember my time at school where you would sort of mix colours together to see what you would end up getting, and certainly with the primary colours, knowing those kind of a little bit off by heart. What I was looking at as well was various websites that could also support this kind of, I suppose, developing a greater awareness of art and design. And I did find the Tate Modern website absolutely brilliant. There was loads of videos on there. There was loads of pictures of different artists. I just thought it was just really, really nicely presented, but very child friendly. And I think would just be a really good website to go on. Now, I have added various websites into this presentation. We will send you probably a separate list so you can click on those links slightly easier. So that is something that is a really good idea, is to explore art, famous bits of art, and get a little bit more of an understanding of the different types of art as well. So, as I said earlier, how do we test it? Well, this was one of our questions that we had within our critical thinking booklets that you've probably seen now. And it was question 1. I'm just going to read it to you. And it says, a painter uses light and shadow to make an object appear three-dimensional. What technique are they using? Collage, perspective, shading, printmaking, or blending? Maybe you might like to have a little go at that. So in the chat, if you want to actually put down the answer in the chat, we'll check it and see. Right, yeah, we've got some answers coming up there. So lots of you going for C. And of course, you would be right that in order for it to appear three-dimensional and to show that kind of dimensions, if you like, then it would be shading that needs to be used. That's the technique they need to apply. So well done. If you got that correct in the chat, well done. I can see lots of good answers coming through there, which is great. One of the things that we've also tried to do within these booklets here is also sort of focus a little bit on terminology as well. I think it is really useful to sort of build a glossary up for the different topics as well, because as much as they talk about children not having to know any facts or anything like that, I think certainly answering some of these questions, if you don't know some of the key words, you are going to find it quite difficult. And we're going to be doing a lot of revision, certainly within our kind of revision camps and things like that, where again we can return back to some of the key words that we've introduced within the booklets that we provided. Let's move on now to computing. So again, these are some of the recommendations. They suggest that children maybe use coding websites. I know some children may have used or done coding at school. Possibly they're part of a coding club. Maybe use things like Scratch. Now, I'm no expert in this area, but I do know that you can go online and get Scratch, I think, for free and do some basic coding. And that probably is just a nice thing for children to do. Maybe design a game and maybe some animations, but using code. And even, I think it mentions Python there, which is another one that you could maybe use. I think the other thing they want children to be able to do as well, so quite a basic level really, is to be able to use devices properly, understand what to do if they go wrong, in a very simplistic way. And I think that's just quite nice anyway. Also, from a sort of computing aspect, looking at things like traffic lights and how they work. And I know certainly in the familiarization booklet there is a question related to that. So this was our one of our questions again within our booklet here, and this was sort of titled Critical Evaluation. So I'm just going to read this to you, and again, you're more than welcome to have a go. So a pupil searches online for best laptop for gaming and clicks the first result because it looks professional. Which is the best critical thinking response? Is it A, trust it because it appears first? I assume that's the right thing to do. Ignore all the results. Compare several sources and check if it's an advert or sponsored link. Only use websites with pictures, or choose the most expensive laptop. What we tend to find with a lot of the multiple choice kind of options is that some of them you can obviously rule out. And on the question booklet, you can do that. So you might decide, well, I know it's not the first one there. Trust it because it appears first. That's not always the case. Ignore all results. No, I don't think it's that one. Only use websites with pictures. No. Choose the most expensive laptop. And again, it's C. So sometimes through a sort of a process of elimination, you can end up getting to the right answer. But you can see that a question like that doesn't necessarily require a huge amount of background knowledge. It's more about applying their critical thinking skills and working through it logically. And I often find with a lot of these kind of style of questions, it is the most logical one that the child really needs to go for. Someone is asking about the kind of the year 4 aspect, which is great. And I love the fact that year 4 parents are here today. In terms of the open day, yeah, year 4s, I'm sure, can go. There's nothing to say you can't. You might want to go early. They're not going to stop you in terms of an open day. Also asking about kind of booklets and things like that. The booklets that we're using at the moment, we're obviously just using with our year 5 pupils. However, because we're very busy at the moment producing content, we are going to be introducing some critical thinking skills into our year 4 course for block 5 and 6. So they will start to get a little bit more familiar. I would say for us, in terms of generating content, it's been quite, well, many sleepless nights really in terms of making sure that we get all that content written and created, which has taken a huge amount of time. But I think really what we do realise is that we're in a very good place with our year 5 children into making sure we're covering all the different aspects of the syllabus. But we want to then feed that in to our year 4 course, because of course, as I said right at the beginning, these changes were only made in April of last year, or sort of cemented in April. They were sort of suggested around March, but April was when they sort of clarified that's what they were going to do. So let's move on now to design and technology. And again, it's probably one of those subjects in your mind you're thinking, well, how are they going to test children's knowledge of design and technology? It's a very practical topic, isn't it? Well, they make some suggestions that children use materials at home to design structures, understand engineering principles, even taking apart things and seeing how they work. That does come with a little word of warning because it says with permission. So we don't want them going in and taking apart your kettle and everything, and then you find that you've got bits scattered everywhere. But certainly devices you're happy for them to take apart and see how they work. And again, I just think that's a nice thing to try and do. And I think, you know, getting children to understand our world that we live in a little bit more is a good thing. They've also suggested, think of a design that could make life easier. And one of the things they said was, imagine improving a radio for an elderly person. What factors or what functions would you add into that radio to make it a better use or easier for an elderly person to use? So again, nice idea. How again does it come into a sort of an exam situation? Well, again, we did produce a design and technology critical thinking booklet, and see if you can have a go at this question. It's called Testing Fairly. A class tests two designs of a wind-up torch for emergencies. They want to know which design gives more light for longer. Which plan is the fairest test? Is it A, try each torch for different amounts of winding and judge by your eye? Wind both the same number of turns, measure brightness with a light meter, and time how long it stays above a set brightness? Test one torch at lunchtime and the other after school. Ask for your friends which torch looks best, or use different batteries in each torch to see which performs best. Let's see whether any of you have had a go at that one. Well done. Excellent. Yeah, superb. Excellent. I can see lots of you having a go. And of course, yes, you would be right. It is, of course, B. In order to make it a fair test, you need to do it the same number of times, measuring with a light meter. This might not be something that children necessarily get an opportunity to use in primary school, probably more of a secondary school thing. It's an interesting question about the longest answer, and we have thought a lot about that actually in terms of our booklets, just trying to ensure that the longest answer isn't always the right answer. Sometimes, okay, you need to provide quite a bit of information, but yeah, good point. And I think that's important to realize that it won't always be the longest answer as the answer. I know it has been on the ones that we've seen so far, but certainly that is something that we've thought about. This is my territory a little bit, geography. I did a geography degree. I did it at A level. I did it at GCSE. Absolutely love geography. So just a couple of things that the exam board suggests here. Understanding weather and climate. So getting children even to watch the weather forecast, maybe understand kind of some of the symbols, kind of the climate in different parts of the world, what it's like, for example, around the equator, what it's like in the southerly and the southern and northern hemisphere and the comparisons. I think the explore maps and compass skills again is a very practical thing. But if children are able to do that, I know certainly later on, and again, doesn't really help them with the 11 plus necessarily, but if they ever do Duke of Edinburgh or anything like that, really good opportunities there. But again, if you have a chance to explore maps and things with your child, do that. Design a new town. Again, where would it be? What do you need to do that? Compare two places. What are the similarities? What are the differences? Maybe with urban and rural areas, maybe with large megacities, and compare them to smaller locations. I think in terms of geography, again, it is incredibly broad, but I would certainly maybe suggest going on to the BBC Bite Size website. Absolutely brilliant resource again. Really, really easy to follow. Children can have some really good interaction with that site in terms of doing quizzes, listening to videos, etc. I also think the National Geographic for Kids is a super website, and I've been on there quite a lot actually. Certainly, even just from my own understanding, but I know children that have explored that site and really enjoyed it. So again, we will make sure that we list that out. One of the things that I think certainly can happen with geography style questions is that they do need to read them really carefully. So this one, number 6, which location would be least suitable for a wind farm, is again important to read. It's not which location would be the most suitable for a wind farm, it's the least suitable. So a windy coastal cliff is going to be a good place to have a wind farm, so it's not going to be that one. An exposed upland area, so understanding the vocabulary. What does exposed mean? Well, exposed means to be very open. A flat open plain, really good for wind turbines. A sheltered valley surrounded by high hills. Well, that's obviously going to be our answer, because anywhere where you've got lots of hills, not an opportunity to have lots of wind, is going to prevent those turbines from turning. That must be the answer. We'll just check E, an offshore platform. Well, again, offshore platforms are a primary target for building wind turbines because, again, they get the wind coming across the oceans and the seas. Really good opportunity to talk as well around these questions about why there are so many wind farms, and talking about different types of energy. And this sort of leads me to the next question here, which is, which of the following is a renewable resource? And the answer to that one would be wind. Well done if you've had a go. Well done. Excellent. I can see some of you typing the answers. You don't need to type them once. I can see them as you type them in, but brilliant. I know you're just double checking that I've seen them, but well done, parents and children, if you're having a go at these. History. Now, another very, very broad topic. So questions may relate to timelines of events. I think it's a really good idea that children do look at people's lives in history, whether that's you've got some pictures there of Gandhi, of Churchill, of various different people there. It's quite nice to see whether I know most of them there. Picasso, I think, is one of the people in that picture. Einstein, etc. So again, if you want to explore that a little bit more, I would direct you to the BBC programmes Meet the Icons, and I'll send you a link for that. A really, really good opportunity to individually watch videos and things about people in history, Marilyn Monroe, etc., Martin Luther King, loads of different people from the past. And it's not just about learning dates. Please don't think that the history kind of questions is all about dates. I do think children do need to have maybe a bit of an idea of the timeline of some of the key events. But again, looking at old photos and objects, etc., really, really good. Asking questions about history. If your child does get the opportunity to go to any of the museums as well, I think that's a really, really good idea. Even places like Hampton Court, where I know sometimes children do go on school visits there, just to see how people used to live. They're wonderful opportunities. Watching documentaries as well about different periods of time, whether it be the Tudors or the Romans, and understanding a bit more about things like World War I and World War II. So, where and how will this be actually tested? Well, again, the way of doing it is to look at some individual periods of time. This is a sort of a Victorian question. Thought it was quite apt, really, that I put something Victorian in, being that in Reading you've got Catesgrove, which is a wonderful school which actually has an old Victorian classroom in it, and again, I remember going there on a school trip with children, and they got the best experience, and they learned a lot about how Victorian children used to learn and what a Victorian classroom would have been like. So a school trip visits a Victorian classroom and sees children writing on slates. What is the best explanation for this? Is it A, paper was expensive, B, slates were not used, C, children didn't know how to write, D, teachers preferred drawing, or E, Victorian schools did not allow reading? So the answer to that one, which some of you are putting in the chat again, which is great, is of course A, paper was very expensive. So the idea of using a slate would be that you could obviously rub it out and reuse it again. That's exactly what a lot of the Victorian children would have done. They would have used a slate in order to do their work on and write their letters and do their numbers and things. So again, I think just having an understanding of how things were in the past and how people used to live is another important aspect to the history part of critical thinking. And again, in block 3, week 2, we did a lot of critical thinking around these history topics. I thought I'd also just show you a timeline of historical events. This I actually took from a website called Twinkle. It's probably one of the most used websites for teachers in schools. It has a huge amount of resources in terms of worksheets and posters and things. And if you go into a school and you don't see any Twinkle, you would be surprised, I think, because lots of schools use them. It is a paid website. I mean, you can, as a parent, pay for it if you want to. I wouldn't necessarily expect you to go to that expense to do that, but we do use some of the resources around Twinkle even within our lessons. So this is just a historical timeline. I just think it's just quite nice. It's just a nice visual representation of the major events in our past. And again, I think children can easily track that. And again, just having an opportunity to revise that, maybe discuss it a little bit, and have an understanding of those different events is going to be really important. Moving on now to music. And again, it's one of those topics, again, you must be asking yourself, well, how are they going to test it? How is Future Stories going to test them on their musical ability? They're not going to be able to get them to play a musical instrument in the exam. They're not going to be able to get them to sing. They're not going to be able to get them to listen to different genres of music. But there is a way of testing a little bit of their musical understanding. Certainly, there is an advantage if children do play a musical instrument. And I know that's not possible for every child, but if they do play the guitar or they play the piano or any musical instrument that they may have started in their primary education, can help them because they'll have a little bit more of an idea of the terminology, understand how to read music, and I think that would certainly help in this particular section. Now, what we did within our critical thinking booklets was we explored a little bit around the terminology again. So I was very much around thinking about how we bring in those terms so children are more familiar with them. And this question here, I think, highlights it really, really well. Two instruments play the same melody, but one plays much higher than the other. What is the main difference between their sounds? Is it texture, tempo, pitch, structure, or dynamics? Now, in order for the children to do this question, what we did before they got to this one is we did a musical warm-up where again they were exposed to a lot of different terms in music and they had to sort of match up the definitions. And also further on to that, we sort of built it up again, was we looked at closed procedure, which is missing letters. We will look at that later because that comes in the Beacon paper and I'll talk to you more about that in terms of how we teach it. But I think introducing those basic musical terms is certainly worth doing, and referring back to that critical thinking booklet again, just to revise those key words. So the answer, which many of you are getting right in the chat, of course, is pitch. Again, I think children just having an understanding of different types of music as well, and even listening to different types of music is just a lovely activity to do anyway. But again, just building their understanding around that topic area. Physical education. We know we've talked a bit about the sports aptitude test, which Reading Boys do hold, and 10% of their applicants do get in on a sports scholarship, so to speak. And they suggest that children learn new sports, skateboarding, archery, rock climbing, even if it's just for fun or skill development, and just understanding the techniques that are there. One of the questions that I have seen within Future Stories documentation is a question around tactics. So, for example, if a team is losing and they, do they put on another defender or do they take off an attacker, or just having a little bit of an understanding of the tactics around different games is a really good thing to do. I thought I'd also mention at this point, I thought about this as I was kind of typing these slides. We also have the Winter Olympics on at the moment, and just having an opportunity to watch some of those sports, the sports that you probably have maybe never seen before, or a child may never have seen before, and it's quite nice to see the rules, how they do things, whether that be curling or the skeleton or any aspect linked to the skiing events. Again, just a nice opportunity to see something slightly different. A lot of the questions as well can talk to children about teamwork and kind of sports ethics as well, and performance. So again, just having a good breadth of understanding around physical education. These are two of the questions that were taken from this booklet, which was Block 3, Week 4. And again, I'm just going to go through them and you're more than welcome to have a go. So, a PE teacher includes problem-solving tasks, such as creating a new game with limited equipment. What skill is primarily being developed? Is it A, memorizing rules, B, arm and leg strength, C, running speed, D, creativity and teamwork, or flexibility and strength? Well done. If you have gone for D, you are right. Of course, it does develop creativity and teamwork. And I think the clue within the question, again, it's all about using the question stem to help you, is around the problem-solving tasks. And of course, limited equipment. So you've got to be creative. You haven't got very much to work with. So the teamwork sort of, I think, comes under the problem solving a little bit together. If you're working things out, you're going to need to have good teamwork skills. And then the creativity comes because you haven't got very much equipment to use. One of the websites I used actually as a primary school teacher doing a lot of PE within primary schools was something called the PE Shed. Now, again, this is aimed at teachers, but has some really nice resources, I think, for children to watch. So do explore that. We will send that link out with all the other links that have come up in this presentation today. But the PE Shed is another good one. I don't know why, but I thought I'd put in two physical education ones. So I'm going to just ask you to try and answer this question. In basketball, a player must dribble whilst avoiding defenders and looking for a teammate. Which combination of skills is most important? Power and flexibility, coordination and decision making, balance and endurance, strength and accuracy, or speed and sportsmanship? We've got some different answers on this one, which is sometimes a little bit nicer. We can discuss it in a moment. Okay, so the answer to this one is actually B. Now, I'll just explain why it is B. The ones of you that have maybe chosen a slightly different answer, just so you understand why. So, power and flexibility. Now, this basketball player is dribbling the ball. They don't necessarily need a huge amount of power to do that. So we can rule out that one. They might need a bit of flexibility because they're kind of moving from side to side, but not necessarily power. Coordination, well, you need coordination when you are dribbling a ball. You also need good decision making. And the reason that the decision making is important in this question is that you are looking for a teammate. You're looking for someone to pass the ball to. So you've got to decide who I'm going to pass it to. When am I going to pass it? Balance and endurance. Well, if you know what endurance means, it means to last a long time. Well, basketball doesn't really necessarily require that kind of, I was going to say fitness. It does in a way because games can last quite a long time, but it's sort of short bursts of energy that's required. So endurance that's isn't going to really help you necessarily with looking for a teammate or dribbling. Balance, I would say yes. So it's interesting that on some of these, one of those skills is important, but maybe not necessarily the other one. Again, sort of a back to endurance. Endurance is sort of associated more with things like if you run a marathon or you do a long distance race, like, I don't know, 5,000 meters or 1,500. Strength and accuracy. Well, again, we talked about power not being so important. So strength doesn't really help you here. Accuracy, yes, because you need to pass it to your teammate. Speed and sportsmanship. Speed, yes. So some people in the chat did go with E. And I kind of get what you're getting at, because speed is important. When you're dribbling, you need to do it relatively quickly. Not all the time, but generally it helps you get past your opponent. Sportsmanship is a really important aspect, of course, of basketball or any sport that your child is doing, but it doesn't relate to finding a teammate in this particular situation. So we would rule out E, and as we've already said, B would be the answer. One of the things that we've done as a company is ensured that we really do look in detail around the Key Stage 2 national curriculum, because it does seem like they're pulling in aspects of the national curriculum, of course, into these critical thinking questions. Our understanding as a business of the national curriculum is vast. As I said earlier, I'm a former primary school teacher, so I was using the national curriculum all the time. I must admit, that wasn't my sort of previous life. It was some years ago. I was actually in a school. But what I do now is, even as a governor, I do look a lot at the national curriculum and the types of things and objectives that they're teaching. And that guides us then on our question content, because we want to make sure that the things that are being taught within the school apply then to our 11 plus exams. And that is so important. And this is where now we are making a greater synergy, if you like, between what children are doing at school with what they're actually going to be doing with the 11 plus exams. So this is just a capture here of Key Stage 2 physical education and what children do, the kind of things that they learn. And what was quite interesting, and the reason I wanted to bring this up, was in that last question we just saw about basketball, you will have heard me say things about flexibility, strength, balance. And these are things, obviously, that they're trying to teach again within the national curriculum, which I believe will have a direct impact then on their 11 plus and their knowledge base. We are nearly there, I promise. I know we've gone through pretty much every subject area in Key Stage 2, but we're on to science now. Now, the science curriculum is quite rigid, actually, in primary schools. So we know sort of generally by year group what they learn. So whether it be friction, whether it be electricity, and you can quite easily find out online what the children have to do. I am going to direct you again. You'll think like I'm a bit of a broken record on this, but the BBC website is superb. It really is. The bite-size chunks that they put on there in terms of different topics, the videos they've got, the activities they've got, absolutely brilliant. So I've just got a little capture under here. Look, what is a life cycle? How animals reproduce? Food chain challenge in the savannah. Food chain challenge in the tundra. Brilliant, absolutely fantastic opportunity for children to find out more about their science curriculum. And they do suggest doing things at home, which can sort of build up an understanding of the world around us. And I believe things like making a volcano, something I remember doing at school, where we sort of made it out of clay. You then mix up baking soda and vinegar, and then it sort of fizzes out. And it's a bit like the lava or the magma coming out of the crater, and understanding sort of chemical reactions and things like that. Science is, as it says there, about being curious. It's about finding answers to questions. So again, certainly encourage that for our students as well. Notice how things change, like ice melting or plants growing. Grow your own. Good opportunity now as we venture into spring to maybe grow some of your own plants, even in little pots. Compare different species as well, it talks about. So again, how do they test this kind of knowledge around science? Well, they might give them, for example, um, a scenario. And this is a very much a scenario number 5. Forces and fair testing, friction and air resistance. This is a very common experiment which is run in schools where you test different shoes. And I'll just read you the synopsis here. A student tests which shoe sole has the greatest friction on the same floor by pulling each shoe with a force meter until it just begins to move. Which variable should they keep the same to make it a fair test? So go through the options. Colour of the shoe, should that remain the same? The student's favourite shoe, the time of day they do the test, the brand name of the force meter. So the force meter is the thing that measures, you pull it and it's sort of measured in newtons, I think. It brings me back to my school days. The amount of weight pushing down on the shoe. Well, of course, it would be that. That's what needs to remain the same. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a fair test. There would be other variables, of course, that would need to be a fair test on that, using the same Newton meter for force meter, for example. Also making sure that they sort of start from the same line. But again, they've just sort of used that there. And then if we have a look at this question here, this is quite a nice one. Which is a microorganism? Is it a frog, an ant, a mushroom, an oak tree, or bacterium? Well, of course, it would be the bacteria, which is the microorganism. So that would be E again. And I think with that kind of question, that does involve a little bit of factual knowledge. Again, at the beginning, I did explain that a lot of critical thinking questions don't rely on that. They don't need you to have lots of facts or knowledge. And I think they want to certainly move away with that. But I think in some subject areas, it's kind of impossible to set them questions on things that they may have learned at school without bringing in that vocabulary and that understanding. I think with question 5 here, you could certainly probably answer that without knowing anything about friction. You probably know what the word means, but you don't necessarily have to have studied it at school. I think, though, with the microorganism, that might be something that someone perhaps has had to tell you or you've found out about. So what I've tried to do with these questions is give you an indication of the style, what they will be like. Will they be as easy as some of the things that we've seen? Possibly not. Maybe they'll be slightly more challenging. I don't know. But at least it gives you an idea of the way that it is presented in a multiple choice format. So we've been very much talking about the adventure paper. I am just going to finish off by just talking about one of the subjects which was listed at the beginning, which if we go back to, and that was languages, because I was a bit stumped by that, because when I first saw it, I was thinking your German, your French, your Spanish, your Chinese, whatever language that might be, or your Mandarin that you're learning at school, but it's got nothing to do with that. It's really to do with solving problems, really. Now, this is a made-up language called Savia, and the table shows the names of some of the numbers. Now, you will have seen this if you have looked at those booklets already, and the child has to work out what those different missing numbers are actually called based on what you're given already. So, for example, to work out 5, you might go to 25, realize that mass stands for 20, so it will be Ven. So we put Ven in there. Then if we come down to 17, and we've got to work out what goes in there, we know what 7 is. We've already got Bon, which is the 10. So we can then add in WOL there. That finishes that one off. And then the last one down here, we've already got Bon, which is 10. We need 20. So we put mass in there. I'm sure you get the idea. That's what it means by languages. So it might give them something that they need to solve or work out. based on something that they're given. So again, I think quite good fun. We do have various different questions that we've brought in actually around these kind of questions, just because we didn't know whether there was much out there that existed, but we have found some. So we will be exploring that with the children as we move forward as well. Thank you for your patience today. I appreciate it's a lot of listening and me telling you things, but I'm going to move on now to a different paper now, and that is to talk to you about the Beacon paper. So just going back again, sorry to rewind, but just so we're clear, there are 4 types of paper. We've talked about the adventure paper, that was the multiple choice one, and this is the Beacon paper. And this can come from any of those key stage 2 subjects listed again, but it's where you respond with a short written answer. And we would really describe this very much as a cloze test. And what it involves is children having a good word knowledge, being good at spelling, but also being able to use the context of the sentence to work out the answers. Now, I've foolishly left those answers in. I should have left them blank so you could have had a go in the chat. So some of you might have seen this already. So, what item shows the directions north, south, east, and west? A, something shows the directions north, south, east, and west. You're given some of the letters, and then you need to input the rest of the letters and, of course, spell it correctly. If you were to make a mistake, so imagine then that this goes onto the multiple choice sheet. So an example is down here. You would cross through what you've done. Imagine this was on the multiple choice sheet, and you would write the correct letter above. So again, it is just really important they do that. They do a clear cross, write the right letter. And there's nothing wrong with changing your mind, if you've not quite spelt it correctly. I often find as well with closed passages, it's all about reading slightly beyond the gap, because you might read up to the word and then not know what it is. But if you read on, it makes more sense. And reading everything around the question. So in question 2, many trees are cut down in a rainforest where lots of animals live. What are the animals likely to need to do? They are likely to have to something the rainforest. And you want that word to make sense within the context of what's there. And this would be to leave the rainforest. Obviously, it's talking about deforestation. And of course, if there's lots of deforestation, then unfortunately the animals have to go elsewhere or go to another habitat. Question 3, in the past, children often had to work in grand houses instead of going to school. What were these children known as? They were known as servants. And again, that spelling is really important. And then inputting those letters into the gaps. We do a lot of close practice at Teach It Right, because we know how important that is going to be for their Reading Boys success. Please do not worry if you see something like CEM on a book. Closed passages have been around for a long time. They were very much part of a CEM exam. They are also part of what we're saying is part of Reading Boys. So just ignore CEM. We know they're not going for a CEM exam. We know they're going for a Future Stories exam. Nonetheless, the CEM content that we have, and when we worked under CEM, I think it was at least 5 or 6 years that they used CEM, we are able to utilise that material because it very much marries up to the Beacon paper. There are 3 styles of closed passage. There is these ones which have missing letters. There is also a word bank version where they draw on words from a bank and they have to slot them into the gaps. And there's a multiple choice version. We do all 3 of them at Teach It Right because we don't know exactly which ones they will use. They could well use a word bank version. Therefore, it is important that we cover them off. The wonderful CGP, the closed book, I think it was the last spot possibly that we used that one. Sorry, I can't quite remember exactly where we slotted that one in, but we will be doing more closed practice as we go along. Over the months, we of course do provide a lot of different materials. Please do make sure you have access to these ones. I've just captured just 8 of them there. So the antonyms word list, the synonyms word list, commonly misspelt words, Animals and their babies is quite good to know. I'd say probably more applicable to GL, but quite a nice thing to learn. Homophones, important, punctuation, homographs, and even a recommended reading list. These are all on the student portal, but if you don't have any of them or you couldn't find them, I know sometimes the portal can be a bit slow. I can only apologise about that. We are working on that in the background, trying to make it a bit more speedy for you. But certainly in regards to getting access to those, just drop us an email, say, I need some of the word lists, I haven't got this or that, and we will send those over to you. Okay. Right, we move on now to the discovery paper. Now, this is the creative writing. Children will be given a title and they will be asked to write for approximately 25 minutes, but 5 minutes of that is planning time. So that was last year. They could change it again. They could make it 30 minutes. They could make it 20 minutes. I don't think they'll make it any shorter than that because they obviously need children to be able to produce enough writing that can be marked and looked at. A parent recently asked us at Reading Boys at St Joseph's College, where we run our classes on a Saturday, about mark schemes. And I will talk about mark schemes today. So hopefully that will answer your question a little bit around things to look for in their writing and some typical mark schemes, some of which are our own that we use, but also one that I know another exam board uses as well. So I'm just going to go through this in a little bit more detail. So for the creativity task, you will be given a special answer sheet to write your answer on. You will have a short time to plan on the question booklet, just to be aware that is not marked, okay? So it's only for you to plan. You can do your plan however you like. We will be suggesting, and we will do it in our lessons. I know Tolu and Helena suggest quite a bit, and Sally, around when you are writing to use things like story mountains, so you structure your writing properly, though therefore it has that clear beginning, that middle, and the end. You might just use a list of key words that you want to include when you're writing. You might just write introduction, this is what I'm going to put, the main plot, this is what I'm going to put, and the ending, this is what I'm going to put. Don't forget as well, parents, that this is a very short period of time to write. We are not expecting a child to do a massive big story with loads of characters, loads of events. They just don't have time. This is very much a capture. So it might well be just a description that they're going to do. It might be a part of a story that they're going to write, but we are not expecting the children to be able to write a huge, lengthy story with lots and lots of events and things happening. That's not what they're required to do. But what they are required to do is obviously make sure that the writing that they do is of a good quality and a good standard. So things like joined handwriting is a must, an absolute must. If your child does not join the handwriting, they need to. Print is just not going to do it, I'm afraid. They've got to make sure that their handwriting is neat. They also need to have basic structure there. They need to make sure that they have their capital letters, their full stops, their basic punctuation marks, things like commas, apostrophes used correctly. And we will explore that a lot. And we do a lot of that groundwork actually in year 4 as well, where we do quite a bit of work on punctuation and grammar, because that then helps them with their writing. We can't expect children to write well if they don't understand the functions of some of the punctuation marks and things like that. One of the things that the familiarization booklet does do is it does give you a little bit more guidance on the creative writing and sort of how to go about answering the question. So again, just to be clear, the planning or the rough notes that are made will not be marked. They will be given time to plan their answer. We think about 5 minutes or so. There is space on the question booklet to write notes, make a plan, or draw a spider diagram. Didn't mention spider diagrams earlier, but that's quite a good way structuring your writing. You know, you put the concept in the middle and then coming off it, sort of 8 legs like a spider with lots of different thoughts and ideas. You will not be allowed to start writing on your answer sheet during the planning time. So you can't skip ahead. I would advise your children not to do that anyway. I think the planning time is important. What we notice quite a lot in our mock exams is that children don't do the planning bit. they just wait or they just have time to think. It is certainly a really good idea just to get some thoughts down about what you're going to write, the kind of words you're going to use. Maybe you could start listing maybe a simile you're going to use, a metaphor, some alliteration, personification, some aspects or literary devices that you're going to add into your writing. Those get you marks, and we'll talk a bit more about the mark scheme in a minute. You will be told when the planning time is finished and when you can start writing on the answer sheet. Here are some examples, and I'll explain about these quite quirky pictures in a moment, but you might be asked to write a poem, for example. And this is quite a nice poem, I think. Write a poem about the pen that you're holding. Describe it through all 5 of your senses. It's a lovely idea, I think. Question 2. What else could your chair be used for? Come up with 2 very different imaginative ideas. Persuade us that this is the best use of your chair. I really like that. Number 3. The world is now silent. No noises exist. Describe a problem that would exist because of this and suggest a solution. Number 4. Look at the image below, and sometimes they can do this where they'll provide a sort of what we call a picture stimulus, which is really a picture to write about. If this was a metal object, imagine what it could be used for and write instructions to go in a guide for a new buyer. So a slightly different style of writing that. Example question 5. If a dragon suddenly landed on your school roof, what would you do? Would you hide, talk to it, or ride it? There's no right answer. Just use your imagination. One of the ways that we try and stimulate these ideas and this imagination is actually through something called Pobble. Pobble 365, which is a website which provides a lot of different pictures, lots of different activities, brilliant to use at home. You can join for free, as it says there. And these pictures which they have also have a number of tasks that go with them. One of the activities I particularly like is something called sick sentences. Now, I need to be careful here because I know for children at school, sometimes that word sick can mean cool. We don't mean sick or cool here. We're talking about sick as in unwell, and that it's not a very good sentence. And the idea behind that is that they need to make that sentence better. So they need to add in lots of adjectives. They need to maybe add in adverbs or better verbs. They're really fun activities to do with your children at home. They're very simple. So you provide the child with the sick sentence and you say, right, can you make this better? That first line that your child writes down needs to be a good hook, really does need to hook the children or hook the reader rather. So when they're reading it, they think, oh yeah, I want to read on. And there's various different ways of doing that. And of course, that is something that we explore at Teach It Right in terms of making sure that their writing stands out. Please do explore Pobble if you haven't seen it before. A really, really good website and a really fun way of getting children to write, which sometimes, I must admit, is not easy. We do have those reluctant writers, and it's about inspiring them to write, which is, again, really important. Going to talk to you a little bit more, and this is very much based on the question that we had from one of our parents recently, was around the marking. So we have, this is not our actual one. We actually have a marking scheme at Teach It Right that we use a lot for our mock exams and also within house as well. So I'll show you part of that in a moment. But this is just to give you an idea of what examiners are looking for. So let's just run down through them. So ideas. Sometimes actually coming up with an idea for a short piece of writing is not easy. I often find if a child has written, for example, about dragons before, or about a storm, or their most memorable moment, or it sometimes can really help them, because if they go into the exam and there is a title which they think they've written about before, you can imagine how how much easier that is then to get your ideas down. So the more writing that children do, the better, because the likelihood is that there might be something there that they can then sort of draw upon that they've already done before. So for band 4, so this is the top band, if you like, in this writing scheme. Clear and original writing may include abstract forms, physiological ideas, sorry, I can't get that word out on a Sunday morning, physiological ideas, metaphors, securely focused on task in content and style, ideas explored in depth. So all the way down through band 4, when we look at the vocabulary, they need to spell accurately for the basic vocabulary they're using, but be ambitious. Now, I often find with children, when they are ambitious with their vocabulary, sometimes they worry about their spelling. Don't. If they think they know a word that's a really good word, they can't quite spell it, but they think they know how to spell it, it is better to have a go at putting it down. What the examiners are interested to see is how broad that vocabulary is. Yes, of course, basic vocabulary and spelling is important, but when it's words that are a little bit more ambitious, have a go, put it down on your page. You're more likely to get marks for it. Grammar, secure tenses, of course, throughout, maintaining the same tense throughout the story or bit of writing. Connectives, paragraphs, so important and so easy to do that when you change maybe setting or you introduce another character or you're moving to talk about something slightly different within your description, make sure you start a new paragraph. No paragraphs mean very, very poor marks. If it's just one lump of text put together and even maybe not starting a new line, if you're doing dialogue, can really reduce down your marks. Punctuation varied and used creatively. I often find with punctuation that sometimes it can be open to interpretation a little bit about, well, do I put a comma there? Do I not? I think, again, if there's any doubt, it's best to put that punctuation in. It is quite good as well to show off with the punctuation that you're using. And what I mean by that is, can you get in an exclamation mark? Can you get in a semicolon? Is it possible to introduce a little bit of dialogue into what you're writing to show that you know how to use speech marks, how to use commas? Advanced bits of punctuation are things like semicolons. I would say things like dashes, maybe to show parenthesis if you're going to use parenthesis within your writing. And again, if you do, you're probably having more complex sentences anyway. I would certainly say using speech marks, maybe even an ellipsis. Again, just things that sort of show off that you know you're using those bits of punctuation correctly. It is important, though, if you're going to put an apostrophe in, you are using it in the right context. So whether it's possession, like if you're saying Chris's shoes, you would put the apostrophe after the S. You might add another S. You don't have to, but you can. Whether you also use an apostrophe for a contraction correctly. So, for example, it is. I've seen that done incorrectly a lot of times where it's meant to be it's as in possessive, and really the child should have avoided putting an apostrophe in. So this just gives you an idea. I'm not going to read through every single band, but you can see how it sort of progressively gets down to band 1, where you're obviously getting your lower marks. So I think those 5 concepts, because I don't think we want to overcomplicate it, are good things for you to look at home if your child is doing any writing. Look at their ideas. Are they interesting? Are they imaginative? Are they creative? What vocabulary have they used? Is their grammar secure? What's their structure like? Have they got a nice opening, a middle, an end? What about the punctuation? What punctuation have they used within their writing? So we will get this out to you, and I think it just gives you an idea. It does talk about continuous writing. That's where they're given an opening paragraph and they have to carry on, or an opening sentence. A couple of years ago, one of the titles at Reading Boys was I stepped onto an island and I saw. And they then had to carry on that description. Quite interestingly, one of the students that came out of that exam told us that they didn't write about an island as in an island in the ocean. They talked about an island as in an island in a road, like a crossing island, which I thought was genius, because I'm sure that would have stood out as being a very unique piece of writing compared to what most people will have done. Anyway, that's critical thinking, isn't it? Thinking outside the box a little bit, I guess. So again, we will send that over. We'll also send you this slide as well, which talks again a little bit more about what examiners are looking for. And I've sort of talked a lot about those things already, about having a clear beginning, middle and end, being creative, SPAG being used correctly. And of course, a lot of writing is all about vocabulary. I do appreciate, though, creative writing can be subjective. One person might say, oh, yeah, that's great. I'm currently doing some work with ISEB on time for write. And that, again, has been really insightful for me, comparing different bits of writing as a judge. And I think, yeah, sometimes you might say, oh, that's brilliant. Other times you might say, well, no, I don't like that because of whatever reasons. But I think what we are aware that the examiners are looking for is that structure. I think that's probably why it's number one. Has the child got paragraphs? Have they really written in full sentences correctly? And that structure goes a long way. Yes, the ideas, of course, are important because they need to be imaginative, but I think the structure certainly goes a long way. This is one of our sort of more in-house mark schemes, and I know our tutors do use these on occasions where they sort of tick depending on what they've noticed. So we'll get that out to you as well. I thought it was also worth talking to you today a little bit about the test day and what they can bring. So if you can just bear with me, I'll go through this. I've also got something which I'd like to share with you at the end, which I think will really give you a little insight into how the exam is invigilated, because it is invigilated through an audio CD. And I will play you a sample of that in a moment, just so you can hear it. So just in regards to what the children can take, 2 black pens, always a good idea, just in case one doesn't work. And it does sort of talk to you a little bit about the types of pens you're allowed. Small water bottle is a good idea. Clear plastic one does need to be clear. Children, taking regular sips of that is important, well hydrated. Tissues, but it mustn't have any packaging, so you can't see through. A small snack. Make sure it doesn't contain nuts, of course, because there will be a break between the test papers. Glasses, of course, if your child has glasses, make sure they've got them for the day. That's an important aspect as well. So those are all the cans. I don't think I need to necessarily go down through all the cannots, but just in regards to stopwatches and timers, they will have a clock in the room, so there's no need to bring any timers of any sort. Definitely, I would avoid mobile phones. I don't think that's a very good idea. Even sort of turning them off and giving them to the examiner, I would avoid them. You won't be able to contact them during the exams anyway. You wouldn't want to. You don't want to disturb them. But yeah, I would avoid that. No mathematical equipment, no rulers, protractors, no paper. You can't bring any extra paper in. There's always enough space within the question booklets, anything to write things down. No pencils, because obviously it's a pen that they need. No dictionaries, and don't bring in blue pens, blue biros. They must be black. Obviously no recording devices, cameras, etc. So I think that kind of covers off the cannots. So really, the only thing you need to worry about is the things the children can bring in. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop my share, and I'm just going to share with you I'm working on multiple screens here, to share with you an audio for the Reading Boys exam. Please have a listen. It just gives you an idea, any children who are here as well, just an idea of what it will sound like and the instructions that are given. So just bear with me a moment. I'm going to stop that. I'm just going to share my other screen. Sorry, it will just appear black at the moment, but I just need to make sure I share the sound with you. Okay, you don't necessarily need to see this, so...
Welcome to the Year 7 entrance test. Please raise your hand if you can hear this recording. Today, you are going to take the Year 7 entrance test. You will be asked to complete papers which will include topics that you have been learning in school. You will be given a short break at the end of paper 1. You must complete these tests on your own. You must not talk to anybody else during the tests. You must not turn around or look at the work of anyone else. If you need help, please raise your hand and stay in your seat. The only equipment you will need is a black ballpoint pen or a black biro. Please make sure that any other equipment you have with you is placed on the floor beneath your desk. You must not have any mobile phones, smartwatches, or electronic devices with you whilst you take these tests. If you do have such a device, please turn it off now. Then raise your hand and give it to a member of staff. As well as the question booklet, you should also have the answer sheet for paper 1. It should say paper 1 at the top. Your name, date of birth, school, test date and username should be printed at the top of the page. If your details are missing or incorrect, or if you have someone else's answer sheet, please raise your hand now. Each section begins with instructions and an example. Do not begin a section until you are told to do so by this recording. Once each section begins, you will have a time limit in which to complete that section. You should continue to work until the time is finished or until you reach the last question at the end of the section. When you finish a section, you must not turn over to the next section until you are told to do so. If you finish a section early, you can use any spare time to check your work within that section. You must not use any spare time to go back to earlier sections or to move ahead to the next section.
Right, everyone. Thank you very much for listening to that. I think it just a nice little short video there. Just gives you an idea of what that audio will sound like. And certainly, if there are questions that the children have, then they will be allowed to, raise their hand, and they will stop the recording and answer any of those. And they do that at regular intervals as well. But she's quite easy to listen to, I feel, in terms of the pace that she goes at and easy to follow. Thank you very much for joining me on a Sunday in half term. I hope you have a wonderful half term as well. And thank you very much for coming along. One request, please, that I do have, though, before I let you go, and we'll do any Q&As as well at the end. In terms of this as a recording, please don't share it outside of Teach It Right. We work incredibly hard to understand more about the exam system, to get feedback, to try and use every resource possible to make this the best possible course we can, but B, to make sure that we have an advantage. So I think just sharing that around and giving it to other people is something we would really ask you not to do. I know it's something sort of out of our control a little bit, but we would much prefer that it sort of stays within Teach It Right. It's a resource that you're able to use. So thank you very much for adhering to that if you can. Right, I'm just going to stop my recording, so just bear with me a minute.